What's up, developers? This is chapter 11 of my Cloudflare and Hono course, and in this chapter I'll be showing you how to run automated tests with the bun test runner. So in the last chapter I created this function, and the thing is I don't know if this function actually works or not yet because I haven't run it. And so in order to run this function in isolation on its own, I need a test runner. And lucky for us, Bun comes with a built-in test runner. So this is what I'll be using. And here's the documentation for their test runner. I'm not going to go through all of this because it's quite a lot. But what I will point out here is that the test runner will search our directory for files that include .test, _test, spec, and _spec. So as long as I create a test file with that word test in there, then the bun test runner will pick it up and run it. So that's kind of step one is, okay, we've got the bun test runner, but the other thing I need to talk about is the database. So this function interacts with the database. It inserts a subscriber, and what we need is a testing database, a database that can be spun up, run our tests against it, and then tear it down when the testing is done. And we can do that too. So that'll actually be our first step, is to create a test database so that we can run against that. All right, so what I'm going to do to create the test database is I need a script. So here in the root of our directory, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this scripts. And then inside of here, I'm going to have a file that will create the test database for us. So let's name it what it does, create-test-db, just like that. And then we're going to have a function that will create the test database for us. And what I want to do is be able to run this file on its own and create that test database. So then that means down here at the bottom of the file, I'm going to call this function. So when I run this file, it should create the test database for us. So now how do we do it? We need to implement some logic here. So if you remember, the Cloudflare D1 database is a SQLite database. So we need a SQLite database, and also, Bun has built-in support for SQLite. So we can go ahead and import database from Bun SQLite, just like that, and we'll be able to work with a SQLite database. Now it's just saying the database is declared, but its value is never read. That's okay, we're not using it yet. The next thing we'll need is Drizzle, because we need a way to connect to our database and run the migrations. So if we just create a database, it'll be empty and it won't have our tables in there that we need. So let's import Drizzle. And then we're going to import, so Drizzle has quite a few imports, and we are going to use the one for Bun SQLite because we are connecting to the Bun SQLite database. So they have a special adapter just for Bun, which is nice. And then the third thing I need to import is this migrate function from Drizzle. Just like that. And this migrate function will allow us to run our migrations, which live here inside of database migrations, and that will put our schema into our test database so we have all of our tables ready to go. Okay, so what does this code look like now that we have all the imports? So first, we can create the database. So let's say SQLite equals new database test.sqlite. And That's pretty that's it right there. Is that one line of code will create the SQLite database for us, which is super cool. Very easy. And then what we need to do is connect to Drizzle, or connect to our database with Drizzle. Just like that. So now that we have a connection to our database, we can run those migrations on that database. So we can do migrate, and then you can see here the function requires our database connection and then any config. And the config has a migration config in there. So let's pass in that database connection. And then the config we'll need is really just the migrations folder. We need to tell it where to look. So migrations folder, you can see I'm getting some autocomplete from TypeScript. And then we can say /source. So it's going to be at the root here, go down to source, server, database, migration. So server, database, migrations. All right. And then that will run those migrations and get our tables in the database. So then we can just add a console log and say something like test database created and migrated, and do a Command S to get my formatting. And let's take a peek. Cannot find module bun SQLite or its corresponding type declarations. So I think what I need here is the bun types. Maybe I forgot to install those earlier. Bun. Okay, yep. So I just need to install those. So if we come back over to our browser and say npm bun types, that's what I'm looking for. So this will add the TypeScript type definitions for buns so that TypeScript is happy and it knows that bun SQLite is a real thing. Okay, here. So this is the command I want. Bun add -d types bun. Jump back over to VS Code. Command V. All right, and now that's installed, and we can see this updated, and now it's happy. And look at that. When I hover over it, now we get a little bit of documentation here to showing us how this works, database run, etc. Okay, so that's nice. Now, the thing is, how do we run this script and actually make sure that it works? Well, what we can do is create a script in our package JSON to run the script function. So up here in our script section, I'm going to add a new script. So here, I'm going to call this one create-test-db.ts, name it as it is. And then what I can do is run that file using bun run, and then just putting the path to it. So /scripts/ create-test-db.ts. So just like that, and we'll be able to run that file. And when it runs, it will call this function and hopefully create our test database. And so let's go ahead and give it a try and make sure that it works. And I'll just copy that quick so I don't have to type it again. All right, so we can see here test database created and migrated, and that is the console log we put here. And then over here in our folder structure, we have now a test.sqlite. So let's open this up and check it out. So we can see our Drizzle migrations are here. And then there is a subscribers table. So that's perfect. It worked for us. This is great news. Everything is looking good. Now, there's one other thing I want to account for here in this script, and that's if we already have an existing test database with some data in there and I run this again, I want to just delete that and create a fresh test database. So we can do that fairly easily and say const test-db equals bun.file. All right, so bun.file will search for this test SQLite and then assign it to this variable. And if that variable exists, then that means we have an existing test database in which I want to then delete it. So we can use a if statement and say test database dot exists. So there's a function already on there that tells us yes or no. And then if we hover over, this conditional will always return true since this is a promise Boolean. So if it's a promise, that means we need to await. And when we await, we need this to be async up at the top of the function. Okay, so then this will return true or false if that file exists. And if it does exist, let's go ahead and delete that file. So we can do await again, bun.file, and then there's a delete function on there. So it will simply delete the test SQLite, and then it will continue on with the rest of the script and create a fresh one. So that way, every time we run this script, we get a fresh test database, even if there's a previous one lingering there. Now, the next thing I want to do is add another script to destroy our test database so that when all of the tests are done running, we can clear it out. So we can create a new file, just like that. And this is going to look kind of similar to our last file. So let's go ahead and add a new function. And then down here at the bottom, we're going to call that function. All right, and then we can use this same line of code here to delete the test database. All right, and then we need this to be an async function for await to be happy. And then we can add a console log test database destroyed. And that'll pretty much do it for us. So let's go ahead and give this a go. And we can do that by coming down here. And I'm going to duplicate that line. We're going to create a new script, destroy test database, run scripts, destroy test DB. All right. Cool. Now, here in our directory, we still have this test SQLite file. So if I run this script, I would expect it to delete that file. I want it to be gone. So bun run. And then module not found. I might have misspelled something. Destory, yeah. Destroy. Okay, I misspelled it. Okay, hopefully that fixes it. There we go. And we can see it ran and test database destroyed. And then over here in our directory, our file structure, it is gone. So our create and destroy scripts are working. So now to use this all packaged up in one nice command, what I can do is create a third script here, and this will be just called test. So I want to first create my test database. And so we can do that by simply saying run create test database. So we run that, and then So we can chain on another command and then bun test and then bun run destroy test database. Cool. So when we run our test, it will create a test database, run the tests, and then destroy the test database at the end, all with this one script. So that is super nice. And we don't have any tests yet, but let's go ahead and run this script and make sure that nothing crazy happens. So bun run test. And okay, so we basically got what we expected. Test database created and migrated, good. And then bun test, no tests were found. Okay, yep, as expected. And then let's see. So our test database is still there. And the reason why our test database wasn't deleted is because the bun test script threw this error and exited before our deletion script could run. So that's okay. We can just move on forward. And once we have a test file in here, then this should all work. So the next step here is to then create a connection to our test database that we can use in our tests. So I'm going to create a new folder up here at the root level called test. And then inside of here, I can add a file to get the test database. And then inside of here, we're just going to grab the connection to that test SQLite file. So in order to do that, we need bun SQLite. And then we also need drizzle. Now we can call this function get-test-database, nice and simple. And we're going to export this because we'll use it in our test files. Now, to connect to our test database, first we need to connect with bun. So that will look like this. So this might be a little deceiving because it says new database test SQLite. So you might be thinking, oh, we're creating a new test database. Didn't we already do that in this script? We have that line of code right here. Well, that's not actually the case. So if this file already exists, then this new database will actually just connect to the existing one. So this file already exists because we ran this script and it created the database and it ran the migration. So we have all the tables we need. And now here, we're really just connecting to it by basically opening up that file. So we open up that file and now we need to connect via drizzle. And then we can return that database connection. And to save us a line of code, we can actually return here just like that. And then save for formatting. And now this will get us our drizzle connection to our test database. Now we have all of our setup out of the way and we can get to the fun stuff. We can actually write our tests. So if we come down to our server database, we have the queries.ts file. What I like to do is add my test file right next to the file it's testing. So if you remember from just a few minutes ago, by adding .test in the file name, Bun will search for this file and run it when we run the test script. So inside of here, what we want to do is import a couple things from Bun's test runner. it expect mock and before for each. There we go. From bun test. Okay. Cool. So now that we have that, we could write our first test. And we want to test our function here to insert a new subscriber. So let's just say we're going to test that it inserts a new subscriber. So we give it a name like that, and then we'll say async, and we have our body. Now, the goal is to call our function. So it would be insert subscriber, and then I can import that. And then we need to give it some data. So what would that look like exactly? When we look at our function, we need to give it our D1 database connection, and then a new subscriber. And the new subscriber would look like this. So what I'm going to do is put an empty object as the first thing, as the binding, because we're using our test database. So we're going to, basically, this is going to be mocked out and our test database will be put in place of it. And to make TypeScript happy, we can actually tell TypeScript that this should be of the type D1 database. So to do that, we can bring that type in. There we go. And just say as D1 database. Now we need to provide it a subscriber as the next parameter here to this function. So let's create a subscriber right above. And we can import our type for new subscriber as well. There we go, from our schema. So this will tell us exactly what we need. And so email is the only required option here. Everything else is optional. So we're just going to put the email for our testing purposes. So I can say email is going to be test@test.com. Nice and simple. And then we can pass that new subscriber right in like that. And then we can also, just for a good measure, we can set this to the type of new subscriber. So that way, when we hover over this, we now have this TypeScript support. And if we were down here, we could hover over it and see that this is one of these types. So that's just a nice little quality of life feature. Now, our insert subscriber function will return the subscriber that it created. So we can set that to a variable, just like that. And then just to see what happens, we can go ahead and do a console log. When I write tests, at least for the first couple tests, I like to log out my results as a sanity check to make sure everything is working as expected. And here we can see when I hover over this, it is a promise too, which means we need to await this. And then that way we'll actually get our data back. So we're still not quite ready to test this thing out, because if I take a look at this function, insert subscriber, it's going to come here and it's going to call this function get database, which is going to try and get the local database inside of this Wrangler state D1 here. So it's going to try and access that. And that's not what I want. I want it to access my test database. So we need to mock this function out and tell it to instead get the test database connection when running. So that is why I imported this mock up here. So we can say mock.module, and then we can say /database.test. So this is the file that we want to mock out. And then we can add a function as the second argument here. And we can return, so get database to get test database. All right, so what is happening here? So in this file, database.ts, we have a get database function. So we're telling it, hey, when you see this file, this function get called, then replace it with this function instead. So when our test runs, it's going to call this function. It's going to come down here. It's going to see this get database, and it's going to say, hey, I need to mock this out and instead get the test database connection, and then it will continue with the rest of the function. All right. So now I think we're ready to go. Let's go ahead and run this test file and see if it works out for us. So clear that, bun run test. All right, this is looking promising. Let's take a look at what happened here. So our test database was created and migrated, perfect, and then bun test, and it came down here and it found our queries test TS, and this is my console log. So it created the record and it successfully returned this record. And so we got our green check, it passed, and then down here at the very end, our test database was destroyed. Perfect. So that's a big success. That's exactly what we wanted to happen. So our test passed, but it wasn't actually asserting anything. So what we want to do is add some assertions down here. And what I mean by assertion is this keyword expect. So we want to say we want to expect that the subscriber dot email matches up with the email we provided, because when this subscriber is created in the database, the email should not change. It should give us back that same email. So then I can say it should match up with the new sub dot email, just like that. So what we get back here should match up with what we sent over. And then we can add a couple other expectations in here too. So for example, when we get this subscriber back, it should have an ID on it because the ID should be created automatically by the database. So subscriber.id, but we don't know exactly what that ID will be. So we're just going to say we expect it to be defined. So if it's null, this will throw an error and that will alert us that something went wrong. And then the other thing we can check is that it should have a created at date. So expect subscriber dot created at, and we'll also just check that it's defined. And if we pull up our logs again here, we can see this is the result we got back. So it had an ID of 1. It had the same email, test@test.com. It had a created at date and an updated at, and everything else was null because these are optional and not automatically created. So cool. According to the logs, this console log, everything appears to be there as expected. So these expectations here allow us to automatically check all of these without us having to open this up and manually check. So I can then delete this console log and I can run this test and have confidence that if it passed, that means everything worked as expected. So let me run them again, bun run test, and we can see everything passed with the 3 expect calls right in there. So I have this happy path test and it's working, but I also have a couple other scenarios I want to test. So if we take a look at this, when we're inserting a subscriber, what happens if we insert a duplicate email? Well, if we come back over to our schema, we set this up so that email should be unique. So if there is a duplicate email submitted into the database should throw an error and reject it. That's what I expect to happen. So let's test that out and make sure that that is actually happening. So we can write a test and say, throws an error when inserting a duplicate email, and then make our async body of our test here. And then it's going to look pretty similar here. So let's go ahead and copy these two lines. And then what we need to do is actually call this function a second time with the exact same email. So it looks something like this. First, we insert this new subscriber, test@test.com, and then we try and insert them again. And I'm expecting it to throw an error. So let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. All right, we got a fail, we got an error. So that's good. That's what I wanted. I was expecting it to throw an error. And let's see what that error is. SQLite error, unique constraint failed. All right, so that is the error we were expecting, because unique constraint meaning, hey, on the subscribers.email, we already have this email, and the database rule is emails must be unique. So it threw an error. Perfect. And now what we can do is we can just assert that we're getting an error here. So we can wrap this in an expect, and then we expect it to rejects dot to throw, just like that. So if it does not throw an error and a duplicate email goes in, then our test will fail. So our test should now pass. Now, what's going on here? I was expecting this to pass. So if we come take a look, we can see our first test passes, and our second one, we get that same error. The unique constraint failed. But I was expecting this error. So why would it tell me the test fails when I was actually expecting that error? And well, the thing is, what's happening is it's failing on this line. So it's inserting this subscriber, and this line is failing and throwing an error when it shouldn't be. Why would this line throw an error? And well, the answer to that question is that up here we insert test@test.com. So we insert this email, and then down here, we're inserting test.test.com again. And so there, we're getting a unique constraint here because of our first test. So our tests are spilling over. Our first one is spilling over to our second one, causing an error. So that's not great. That's not what we want. And there is actually a solution for that, and that is why I imported before each. So to tackle this problem, we can use before each. And what I want to do is clear the database before each test. So that way each test runs with no data in the database, just the blank tables, a fresh slate. So to do that, we can put a function in here before each, and we can get a connection to our database. And then with this connection, I want to reset the database. Now, luckily for us, Drizzle has a nice reset function already built in. So let's see if I can pull that up quick. So Drizzle seed reset database. There we go. So reset database. With Drizzle seed, you can easily reset using this function. So import reset, and then you just call reset, provided the database connection, and then the schema. So Drizzle seed is a separate package that we need to install. So let's go ahead and bring that up. So bun add -d drizzle seed. and -d as a development dependency because this is only used for testing, not our production code. Now that that is installed, we can import that reset function. Just like that. And then down here, we can call the reset, provided the database connection, and then we need to provide it the schema. So we need to import that schema. And I'm not getting my correct autocomplete, so I'll manually import it. Import star as schema from /schema.ts. There we go. Okay, and now this is a promise function. So we can see promise void, which means I need to await this. Okay, so that should do it for us. Before each test runs, then it will clear out the tables, and so it can run with a fresh slate. Okay, so let's give that a go. Bun run test. Now the test is still failing, and I'm not quite sure why. So this is where we need to break out our debugging skills and tinker with it a little bit. So let's see if I can get some more information. So if I comment this out and I run the test again, let's see if it gives us anything new. And all right, so we received something here, error, expected promise, but we received data. Okay, so taking a look at that, here I am awaiting this insert subscriber, which then returns the data, but toThrows is expecting a promise, or rejects, expects the value to be a promise. So what that means is I just need to remove this await so that we return the whole promise instead of returning the finalized data. So if I return that await, or remove the await, and then uncomment that, let's see if our test now works as expected. All right, there we go. Now there's one last test that I want to write around this logic. So if someone sends an invalid email, I would expect the database to throw an error. And the reason for that is if we pull up the schema again, I added this check. So this check makes sure that the email has an @ symbol, something, a dot, and something. So if we send an email that's not in this format, it should throw an error. So let's go ahead and write a test to make sure that is true. This will be async as our other ones, and then move that over. Now I can copy, actually I'll copy this, and then comment this out for now, and say when we insert a new subscriber, and let's just say it's test@test, so there's no .com. I would expect this to throw an error for me. So let's go ahead and run it. All right, cool. We got a failure, which is what we wanted, and it says the check constraint failed on email. Perfect. That is exactly what we were expecting. So when it says the check constraint, if we come over to our schema, that is this check for this email. So now if I come back over here, I can adjust this so that it matches up with this one, and it expects that error to be thrown. So if I do that and then I remove that line, I won't make the same mistake twice, so we don't have that await in there. So we insert this, we get back the promise, it should be that error. So let's run this. All right, now we got 3 passing tests. Cool. So this is how testing works. We have our test setup now. We've got our mock, our test database. So all of the tests going forward will be a lot easier to write. And this gives us a high degree of confidence that our insert subscriber query is working as expected. So that's it for this chapter. Happy coding and Godspeed.